My name is Sean Maxwell, and this is the story of how my seemingly perfect life unraveled in an instant. It's funny how happiness can blind you to the warning signs. You go through life believing everything is fine, only to have the truth hit you like a freight train. For me, it all started with a camera I set up in the basement. I suspected my 18-year-old daughter and her friends were sneaking down there to drink my homemade beer. What the camera actually captured was something I never saw coming. My wife Melanie with another man, indulging in my beer while they were at it. Melanie and I had been married for 28 years. Together, we built a family with 3 wonderful children, and for the longest time, I believed we had it all. Melanie, the only child of Wade and Irene Winslow, grew up surrounded by wealth and privilege. At 49, she still exudes a beauty and grace that makes her look at least 15 years younger. My background couldn't be more different. I come from a modest, tight-knit family in a small town near Atlanta. Growing up, my grandparents lived next door, and my father ran my grandfather's hardware store, where my brother Connor and I helped out after school. While Connor pursued a career as an electrical engineer after attending Georgia Tech, I followed a similar path, earning a degree in computer science from the same university. Life has a way of intertwining paths, and for me, that connection was Joey, the wealthiest kid in our town and my best friend since childhood. While I was at Georgia Tech, Joey attended Emory University, and we often set each other up on blind dates. One of those dates was with Melanie. She was the only one I ever called back for a second date, and by senior year, we were inseparable, balancing love with the demands of our studies. From early on, I knew Melanie was the one I wanted to spend my life with, but there was a challenge I needed to address before taking that step. My upbringing instilled in me the value of hard work and self-reliance, while Melanie had never known life without financial security. I made it clear to her that if we were to marry, we'd build our life without relying on her family's wealth. To my relief, she wholeheartedly agreed. With my dad's advice about saving 10% of my earnings always in mind, I had enough tucked away to buy Melanie an engagement ring. After proposing, we shared the news with her parents. Melanie and her mother were overjoyed, diving into wedding plans. But her father, Wade, had something else on his mind. He invited me into his study for a private talk about my future plans. I explained I'd already secured a job with a major corporation in Atlanta, and he seemed pleased that we'd be staying close. Months later, Wade called me back into his study. This time, the conversation took a more serious turn. He handed me a prenuptial agreement, explaining that while he approved of me, his primary responsibility was to protect Melanie and their family's assets. I understood his perspective, but seeing the document made the weight of the situation sink in. The agreement was straightforward. If our marriage ended within the first 5 years, I'd receive $100,000 but would have no claim to Melanie's family assets. The payout increased incrementally, maxing out at $5 million after 25 years of marriage. I didn't sign immediately. Instead, I told Wade I needed time to think it over. He respected that and said he'd wait for my decision. I turned to my dad for advice, handing him the agreement. He read it carefully, twice, before saying, "Sean, this isn't about you. It's about protecting their wealth. The real question is, what do you want from this marriage and what are you willing to protect?" His words sparked a deep conversation about my goals, dreams, and the life I envisioned building with Melanie. Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Sean," he said, "when someone asks you to give something up, it's fair to expect them to give something in return. Wade's lawyer is just doing his job, protecting the Winslow family's interests. To them, you're just a small-town boy with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Wade's concern isn't about the present. He's thinking about what could happen years from now. If we were in his shoes, we might do the same." He paused, weighing his words carefully before continuing. "Marriage can fall apart for any number of reasons. This prenup is Wade's way of preparing for that. Living together as students is one thing, but marriage is a whole different challenge. You need to think about whether you and Melanie can handle the tough times, career conflicts, financial struggles, family issues. And ask yourself this, do you even want Wade's money if your marriage doesn't last? What would make you want to take something from their family?" Dad's perspective gave me a lot to think about, and I was grateful I had spoken to him. Afterward, I called my brother Connor to get his opinion. Unsurprisingly, his advice aligned with Dad's. I also reached out to a few trusted friends for their input. By the time I had heard everyone's thoughts, I knew exactly what adjustments I wanted to propose to Wade and how to approach the conversation. On our next visit to Melanie's parents' house, I asked Wade if we could speak privately. He glanced at me, then nodded, suggesting we step into his study to give Melanie and her mom time to discuss wedding plans. Once we were alone, I pulled out the prenuptial agreement. "Sir," I began, "I've thought a lot about this, and I'd like to suggest some revisions." Wade raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet, gesturing for me to continue. "I understand your concerns and why you want this agreement. I love Melanie and I'm committed to our marriage. With that in mind, here are my suggestions. First, over the next 10 years, I'd like you to deposit $100,000 into an investment account. You and I will decide together how to manage the funds, and we'll review it quarterly. This could be a way for us to build trust and bond over something meaningful. Second, if the marriage ends, you keep the investment money, and Melanie and I will divide the marital assets evenly, excluding any inheritances. Third, if I commit adultery, Melanie will keep everything we've gained during the marriage, and you'll keep the investment fund. But if Melanie is unfaithful, I will receive the investment money and full control of the marital assets." I paused, letting him process what I had just laid out before adding, "Finally, after 43 years of marriage, Melanie and I would take full control of the investment account." Wade leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. "That's an intriguing proposal, Sean. It shows me that your intentions with Melanie aren't about money. The investment idea is creative, and I agree it could give us something meaningful to work on together. But I'm curious, why 43 years? And why the strict clauses around adultery?" I smiled, meeting his gaze. "The 43 years is practical. By then, Melanie and I will be 65, and the funds could help with our retirement." Wade chuckled softly, nodding as I continued. "As for the adultery clause, if we split because of irreconcilable differences, it's only fair to divide things evenly. But adultery is different. Cheating isn't an accident. It's a conscious betrayal. Marriage is a commitment to remain faithful. If Melanie ever feels unhappy, she can ask for a divorce. But if she chooses to cheat while we're still married, that's a line I can't accept. Those terms are non-negotiable." Wade leaned forward, his nod now more deliberate. "I understand your reasoning, son. You've made your case well. I'll have my lawyer draft a new version of the agreement for your review. Now, let's go join the ladies." A few weeks later, we sat down with Melanie to explain the revised prenuptial agreement. She looked surprised, clearly unaware of all the discussions that had been happening behind the scenes. After reading through the document, she glanced at me, her brow furrowed. "Sean, are you really okay with all of this?" I met her eyes and nodded. "Yes, Melanie, I am." Melanie took her time rereading the agreement, her expression thoughtful. "Sean, why 43 years? And what's with the adultery clause?" I smiled, already prepared for the question. "Your dad asked me the same thing," I said with a chuckle. "In 43 years, we'll be 65. Think of it as our retirement plan." Melanie gave a small smile but stayed quiet, still processing. I leaned forward slightly. "Here's the thing, Melanie. If we give this marriage our best and it still doesn't work, at least we'll walk away knowing we tried. But adultery? That's not a mistake. It's deliberate. It's sneaking around, lying, and destroying trust. If you ever feel the need to be with someone else, just come to me first and ask for a divorce. I won't be disrespected or made a fool of. I love you and I'm committed to being faithful to you. All I ask is the same in return." She nodded, her face softening, and the conversation ended on a positive note. Our wedding turned out to be a stunning celebration, and our honeymoon was nothing short of incredible. Fast forward nearly 28 years, and our family has grown. We have 3 amazing kids. Seth, our eldest at 26, is named after my father. He works for one of Wade's companies and is being groomed to take over the family business. This fall, he's starting his MBA program. Joel, our second at 25, has always loved the outdoors. After graduating college, he returned to work with my dad, helping out on the family farm. Joel's named after Melanie's father, and my dad couldn't be happier to have someone in the family stepping in to take over the farm and hardware store, especially since neither Connor nor I stayed in town for it. Then there's Leah, our unexpected but cherished youngest. She just turned 18 and has me wrapped around her little finger. She's the most athletic of our kids and recently earned a full soccer scholarship to UNC for next year. When the boys left for college, I converted our basement game room into a brew pub. Melanie and I love hosting gatherings, and the pub quickly became a favorite spot for friends and family to hang out. Recently, though, I started noticing something odd. Beer seemed to be disappearing. At first, it was just a vague feeling, but it became more obvious when I went to grab some IPA for a club meeting and couldn't find any. That night at the meeting, I mentioned my suspicion to Ross Dalton. "I think my daughter might be sneaking into the pub and swiping some of my beer," I said. Ross raised an eyebrow. "You let her drink beer?" "Not really," I replied. "Sometimes I'll let her have a small taste, but that's it." "So why do you think it's her?" I shrugged. "The beer only goes missing when I'm out of town. It can't be Melanie. She's more of a wine drinker. The boys love my beer, but whenever they visit, I always send them home with a case. That leaves Leah and her friends." Ross grinned knowingly. "I've got a solution for you. I can install a motion-activated camera in your pub, and you'll find out for sure." The idea caught me off guard, but made perfect sense. "That's brilliant. Can you swing by tomorrow morning while Leah's at school?" "Absolutely. How does 11 a.m. sound?" "Perfect. Thanks, Ross. I owe you one." The next morning, Ross showed up right on time. In just 15 minutes, he had the camera installed and operational. He spent another 20 minutes walking me through how to use it before wrapping up. Before leaving, Ross asked, "Are you planning to tell Melanie about this?" I shook my head firmly. "No way. She might accidentally tip off Leah." Ross laughed. "Fair enough. When's your next trip?" "I'm heading to Cleveland next Wednesday and coming back Thursday." "All right, let me know if you catch her. Safe travels." Over the next few weeks, I made it a habit to check the footage whenever I grabbed a beer in the pub. Every time, the only people on the recordings were the cleaning crew who came on Tuesday and Friday mornings, and myself. So far, the mystery remained unsolved. I didn't get back from Cleveland until around 1 a.m. Friday, thanks to a 2-hour flight delay. The rest of Friday was spent catching up at the office, and that evening, Melanie and I joined her parents for dinner before heading to a play. Saturday was packed with hosting a barbecue at our house, and on Sunday after church, we visited my parents. By the time we got home, I was so drained I collapsed into my recliner and dozed off. Well, it wasn't until Monday night, when Melanie was out at a meeting and Leah was at soccer practice, that I finally had a chance to check the camera footage from the pub. Expecting to confirm my suspicion about Leah and her friends sneaking beer, I hit play. 5 minutes in, my entire world shattered. Instead of Leah and her friends, the footage revealed Melanie and Dylan, our neighbor, in a compromising and unmistakable situation. My shock turned to fury as I realized this wasn't a one-time mistake, but something deliberate and calculated. I clenched my fists, wishing I had installed audio recorders along with the camera. Anger surged through me, but I remembered my dad's advice. Never act in the heat of the moment. Gather the facts first. Rash decisions only lead to regret. I paused the footage, seething, and grabbed my phone to call Ross. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Sean, what's up?" he asked, his tone casual. "Ross, I need your help," I replied, my voice firm. "Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course." "Did you catch your daughter sneaking beer?" "No," I said, my tone dropping. "It's worse. I caught my wife with the neighbor, and I need your professional services." There was a brief pause. "Sean, I'm sorry to hear that. What do you need from me?" "I need everything. Full surveillance, details about him and her, the whole picture." "Can we meet tomorrow?" Ross shuffled some papers. "I can do 4 p.m. Bring any footage, names, addresses, phone numbers, schedules, anything relevant." "Will do. Thanks, Ross." Melanie hadn't come home yet, giving me time to compose myself. About an hour later, Leah came in, announcing her return. We headed upstairs, where she excitedly told me about her upcoming soccer game. I promised her I wouldn't miss it. Determined not to shy away from the issue, I decided to wait up for Melanie. As I sat there, I couldn't shake the thought, was she really at a meeting, or was Dylan involved again? Either way, I was sure Ross would uncover the truth. The next afternoon, I arrived at Ross's office 5 minutes early, ready for action. Ross greeted me, his tone sympathetic. "Sean, I'm sorry you're going through this," he said. I nodded, getting straight to the point. "I know how you handled Sam's case with Adam Harmon. What's your recommendation here?" Ross leaned forward, his expression serious. I've reviewed your prenuptial agreement. Based on the footage, you already have enough to prove adultery. The question is, what's your goal? I want to know everything about Dylan, I said firmly. His past, his wife, his family. I want to know his every move, what he does, who he sees, what he values most. He's going to regret this. And I want Melanie followed too. Around the clock. Ross nodded, jotting notes. That'll take a team and some time, but we'll start immediately. I also recommend installing additional cameras and audio recorders in your home and Melanie's car. Do it, I replied without hesitation. I wish I already had audio from last week. Ross glanced at his notes. When's your next trip? 3 weeks from today, I replied. I'll be gone for 4 days this time. Perfect, Ross said. That gives us plenty of time to gather the information you need. Did you bring the tape? I nodded. Yeah, I've got everything you asked for. When can we get into the house to set up the new system? He asked. Melanie plays bridge Thursday mornings. How much time do you need? At least 2 hours, Ross said. All right, I'll meet you at the house Thursday at 9:30. As I left Ross's office, I felt a small sense of relief for the first time in days. Steps were being taken, and it was just a matter of time before the full truth came out. 3 weeks later, I kissed Melanie goodbye, knowing it would be the last time. She thought I was headed to Austin, Texas for a work trip, but instead, I drove to Sam's house. By tomorrow, my marriage would officially be over. Adam Harmon had prepared all the necessary legal documents, and they sat neatly in my briefcase, ready for me to serve Melanie with divorce papers in person. That evening, Ross stopped by with the update I had been anticipating. Less than an hour after I left the house, Dylan arrived, and he and Melanie spent the next few hours in our bed. Twice. Ross also informed me that Melanie had asked Dylan to spend the night with her the following evening, as Leah would be staying at a friend's house. I'd spent weeks planning how to handle this situation. The temptation to humiliate them on the spot was strong, but I knew a calculated approach would serve me better in the long run. The next afternoon, I called Wade, Melanie's father, and asked to meet him privately at his office. I told him I had a serious matter to discuss and needed his guidance. Wade agreed to meet me at 6:30 that evening. When I arrived, Wade greeted me at the door, his concern evident. I had never asked to meet him in his office before, so he knew something serious was going on. Sir, I began, I've always thought of you as a second father, and I deeply respect the relationship we've built over the past 29 years. Out of that respect, I wanted to approach this situation with the same care I'd show my own father. Wade's brow furrowed. Sean, what's going on? I took a steadying breath. I'm serving Melanie with divorce papers tonight on the grounds of adultery and... His expression froze. What are you talking about? I have footage of Melanie with her lover. They've been together in our home, in our bed. Right now, as we speak, they're there together. Wade seemed at a loss for words, his face pale. This can't be real. What are you planning to do? I explained calmly. Part of me wants to go home and throw them both out right now. But after careful consideration, I've decided there's a better way to handle this. For the next 45 minutes, I outlined my plan, and by the end, Wade agreed it was the best course of action. At 9:15 that evening, I returned home with Wade, Ross Dalton, Lance White, Adam Harmon, and Logan Monroe, an Atlanta police detective. We gathered on the front porch, and I introduced everyone. Ross informed us that Melanie and Dylan were still in the master bedroom. Through his earpiece, he confirmed they were together. I unlocked the door and led everyone into the living room. Turning to Wade, I said gently, You don't need to see this. It's better if you wait here. I assured him again that I had no intention of harming Melanie. Lance followed us upstairs, holding a video camera to capture undeniable evidence before we confronted them. Outside the bedroom door, we paused, listening for the right moment. When the door opened, the scene left no room for excuses, exposing their deception in full view. Melanie's face went pale as she clutched at the sheets. Sean, oh my God, what are you doing here? She stammered. I kept my tone calm but firm. Melanie, I'm here to serve you with divorce papers and to inform you that you're no longer welcome in this house. Dylan tried to get up, but I stopped him with a pointed glare. Don't move, Dylan. For your own sake, stay exactly where you are. He glanced at the group of men standing behind me, then wisely decided to comply. Dylan grabbed a pillow to cover himself, while Melanie held the sheet to her chest. both of them caught in the most compromising position imaginable. I gestured toward the others. Dylan, let me introduce you to these fine gentlemen. This is Ross Dalton, an investigator. Next to him is Adam Harmon, my divorce attorney, and Logan Monroe, a detective with the Atlanta Police Department. And the man behind the camera is Lance White. I'd love nothing more than to throw you both out of this house without so much as a shred of clothing, but I have other plans for you. And just so you know, this entire house has been under surveillance for the past 3 weeks. I turned to Melanie, my voice cold and detached. Melanie, I know Dylan isn't some random fling. He's an old flame. Over the past few weeks, I've learned more than enough about your regrets. How you wished you'd married him. How you've been sneaking around to be with him. Let's not forget the only reason you married me was because your parents never would have approved of Dylan. You needed me to secure their legacy and give them grandchildren. Well, congratulations. You've done your duty. 3 heirs to the family name. But that's where it ends. Sean, please, Melanie started, her voice shaking. I cut her off sharply. Don't. There's nothing you can say that changes the fact that you're sitting here in our bed with another man. This wasn't a mistake, Melanie. It wasn't some spur-of-the-moment lapse in judgment. I have footage of you inviting him over, not once, but multiple times. I even have evidence of you planning for him to spend the night after I left for my trip. So spare me the excuses. I'm not interested in anything you have to say. I turned my attention to Dylan, who sat silently, his face a mix of shock and dread. Quite the charmer, aren't you? I said, my voice laced with disdain. You've been under surveillance too, Dylan. Ross and his team have been digging into your life, and let's just say the results are enlightening. I nodded to Ross, who stepped forward with a DVD in hand. Let's take a look at what we found, shall we? The screen flickered to life, showing footage of Dylan and Melanie together in various locations, followed by clips of Dylan with 2 other women. But the room truly fell silent when the recording shifted to a restaurant scene. Dylan and a group of his friends were laughing and chatting, completely unaware they were being recorded. One of Dylan's buddies leaned in. Still chasing after married white women, huh? Dylan grinned. Of course. There's nothing better than that. And getting them in their husband's bed? And that's the best part. Another friend chimed in. So, who's on the roster now that you're back in Atlanta? Dylan leaned back, smirking. Oh, I've got 3 married women I'm seeing right now. One of them you'll definitely remember. Melanie Winslow. We go way back. The group erupted in laughter, and one friend asked, Isn't she the one who visited you on her wedding day? Dylan chuckled. That's the one. Funny thing is, she's my neighbor now. Makes things way too convenient. As the recording ended, the room was dead silent. I turned to Melanie, whose face was ashen, and then to Dylan, who looked utterly defeated. The smugness wiped clean from his expression. If I remember correctly, I said, my voice calm despite the tension in the room, she told you she wanted one last time before her wedding, because she planned to be faithful to her husband after that. That's right, Dylan sneered, his arrogance unchecked. She kept her word until about 5 months ago. Now she's telling me she wishes she'd married me instead. Can you believe that? She actually thinks I would have married her. He laughed bitterly, his voice rising as Melanie curled up on the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Ross and Logan stepped forward, standing on either side of Dylan. That's enough, Ross said firmly. When Dylan didn't calm down, they grabbed him and yanked him out of the bed. Dylan, we're almost done here, Logan said, his voice steady. No one's going to hurt you unless you give us a reason. Believe me, it's tempting, but there are people waiting to deal with you. Why don't you get dressed? Your ride should be here by now. Dylan froze, his bravado fading. What ride? He asked, his eyes narrowing. I smiled grimly. Your wife's brothers. They've kindly volunteered to come pick you up tonight. Oh, and before you leave, you should know they've been fully briefed. We've shared everything, your affairs, including the ones with the husbands of the other women you've been seeing. So, Dylan, it's time to face the music. Dylan lunged forward, fury in his eyes. You did what? I swear, out-threaten me? I cut him off, my tone sharp. In front of a detective and a divorce attorney? That's bold, Dylan. Every word you say is being recorded, so I suggest you think twice. I handed him the stack of papers Adam had prepared. Here are your divorce papers. Your wife wanted me to let you know not to bother coming home. Her brothers insisted on coming to get you themselves. They're downstairs waiting, and just so you know, they're not in the best mood. Dylan's rage was palpable, but Ross stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Before you go, Dylan, you should know we've done our homework. Your wife's brothers helped us gather evidence, and we've compiled quite the file. 12 confirmed cases of infidelity over the last 15 years. They know everything, so I'd suggest you head downstairs without making a scene." Logan took Dylan by the arm, steering him toward the door. Dylan's defiance melted away as the gravity of his situation sank in. Once he was gone, I turned my attention back to Melanie. "So," I began, my voice cold and measured, "how does it feel to know the man you thought loved you was just using you? To find out you were nothing more than one of many?" Melanie sobbed quietly, burying her face in the covers. "You've thrown away everything we built, our marriage, our family, for someone who never cared about you. Holidays, birthdays, graduations, you've tarnished all of it. The respect of our children, our parents, and our friends, gone. You've destroyed it all." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "And for what? For a man who treated you like a passing distraction. I'm done wasting my breath on you." She continued to cry, her shoulders shaking as she hid her face. "Your father's downstairs," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. "He's here to take you home. I can only imagine how hard it will be for him to tell your mother about this." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Please, Sean," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't make me go downstairs like this. Let me change." I stared at her unmoved. "You've got 5 minutes to put on the clothes you wore when you let him in tonight. That's all you get." "But Sean," she pleaded, her voice breaking, "I can't face my father like this." My expression hardened. "That's your choice. Either you go downstairs dressed like that, or I drag you down myself. And don't think for a second that your father doesn't already know everything." Her time was up. I turned on my heel, leaving her to deal with the consequences of her actions. Her outfit was undeniably inappropriate. A sheer blouse, a leather miniskirt, and high heels. It was the same outfit she had worn for Dylan. As I escorted her downstairs, she avoided everyone's gaze, her entire body trembling. When Wade saw her, his face filled with disbelief, and he turned away, unable to look. "Sean," he said quietly, "I can't take her home like this. Her mother would be devastated, and after seeing her like this, I don't even know if I can drive." Melanie stood there, her eyes glued to the floor, the shame and silence weighing down the room. The steady ticking of the grandfather clock was the only sound as everyone waited for me to decide. "Wade, I understand," I said after a moment. Turning to Logan, I asked, "Would you mind driving them home in Wade's car if I follow behind?" "Not a problem," Logan replied. I turned back to Melanie, softening my tone slightly. "Out of respect for your parents, I'll give you 10 minutes to go upstairs and change. That's all you get. 10 minutes. The clock starts now." Melanie hurried upstairs with a faint "thank you," returning minutes later in a modest soccer mom outfit. She looked relieved, but her face was still tear-streaked. I walked over to her, taking off her engagement and wedding rings. "You don't deserve these," I said firmly, placing the rings in my pocket. When she reached for her purse, I stopped her. "You leave with nothing but the clothes on your back." Wade reached out to shake my hand, his gratitude evident. "Thank you for letting her change, Sean. I'll handle it from here." Breaking the news to our children was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The pain and disbelief in their eyes were heartbreaking. The questions, the anger, and the struggle to process everything were overwhelming. Melanie hadn't just betrayed me. She had cheated our children out of the family they deserved. My parents' reaction mirrored theirs. A mix of sadness, disappointment, and loss. Leah made a surprising decision after the divorce. She turned down her soccer scholarship to North Carolina, opting instead to play for Emory's team so she could stay closer to me. We compromised. She would live on campus with her teammates, but visit often. Together, we remodeled the master bedroom and picked out new furniture for the pub. When she's away, I still sleep in the guest room. Seth and Joel stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. They check on me regularly, taking turns accompanying me to beer club meetings. Joel even took on the challenge of growing hops for the club, and we're planning a friendly contest to see who can brew the best beer with his homegrown crops. Leah quietly ensures her brothers stay involved in my life. On our lawyer's advice, Melanie and I agreed to a no-fault divorce. Wade understood I had enough evidence to prove her adultery, but we decided to avoid the public spectacle of a trial. I allowed Wade and Irene to handle her personal belongings, ensuring the process stayed private. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Wade called me unexpectedly, asking to meet at his office. Though we often spoke by phone, the formal request caught me off guard. When I arrived, Wade's demeanor was unusually somber. For 25 years, he had tried to recruit me into the family business, but I had always declined, determined to make my own way. As he began his familiar pitch, I raised my hand to stop him. "Wade, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not joining your company. I've never wanted to rely on anyone else's success." "I know, Sean," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. "And I've always respected that. But this time is different. I'm 76 years old, and Seth is still at least 15 years away from being ready to take over. I've always believed that if something happened to me, you would step in." He paused, his voice trembling with emotion. "What's happened with Melanie has devastated Irene. She's so humiliated she can't even face her friends. She hardly leaves the house anymore. Her counselor thinks a long trip away might help her heal. But for that to happen, I need someone I trust to step in and prepare Seth for the future. Sean, I'm asking you, not for the business, but for my family. Please, help me." "Wade, I'm truly sorry to hear about Irene," I said sincerely. "Please let her know she's in my thoughts. But I can't give you an answer tonight. I need a few days to think it over." Wade nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it, Sean, but don't take too long. I need to get Irene and Melanie out of Atlanta as soon as possible. When can you let me know?" "I'll meet you back here in 3 days," I replied. "Good," he said, a small smile breaking through the weight of the conversation. "Oh, and tell your parents I said hello." I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Wade chuckled knowingly. "I know you always talk to your father before making decisions like this. See you in 3 days." As promised, I met Wade 3 days later and agreed to his request. Seth was thrilled about his growing role in the family business, and Wade was right. He still had a lot to learn before he'd be ready to take over. To ensure Seth succeeds, Wade and I set up monthly meetings with him, Joel, and Leah. These gatherings became a family tradition, not just to discuss business, but to maintain the strong support system that has always been a cornerstone in our lives. Melanie moved to Florida with her parents. While she maintains contact with the kids, she's kept her distance from me. Seth and Joel visit her a few times a year, and Leah spends a couple of weeks with her during the summer. Melanie attends some of Leah's soccer games, but it's clear she wants to avoid crossing paths with me. Irene, thankfully, is slowly healing, but she's made it clear she has no intention of returning to Atlanta. As for Dylan, his life fell apart. His wife divorced him, and from what I've heard, he moved out west, broke and disgraced. His name surfaced in at least 8 other divorce cases. He didn't just ruin his own marriage, he left a trail of wreckage in his wake. But as much as I want to place all the blame on him, the reality is those women made their own choices. No one forced them. They chose to cheat, and they bear equal responsibility for their actions. As for me, I've come to terms with what happened. I hope that someday I'll meet someone new to share my life with. I miss the companionship of marriage, having someone to hold, to talk to love. But until that day comes, I wake up every morning, thankful for my children and the life we've rebuilt together. I focus on what lies ahead rather than dwelling on the pain of the past.